I am continuing in my reading. What I'm doing in this series is to read through the entire standard works of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This consists of the Bible, the Book of Mormon, the Doctrine and Covenants, and the Pearl of Great Price. I am continuing reading in a chronological order, according to event, not according to publication or volume. So I'm skipping around a bit as I move along. So I'm continuing in the Gospels again, of course. We've been reading Christ's first Galilean ministry. He started off with being rejected in Nazareth. He casts out an unclean spirit in Capernaum and heals Peter's mother-in-law. He then starts traveling throughout the region of Galilee, preaching and healing those who have the faith to be healed. We've read about the curing of the leper, the curing of the paralytic, where he also forgave sins. And then we read about the calling of Levi, and a little bit of a discourse on fasting and baptism. Now we are going to be returning to doing one gospel at a time. In this video, we have a Joseph Smith translation. Now, what the Joseph Smith translation is, this is a translation or correction done by Joseph Smith to restore those passages that have been lost or corrupted over the years. And in this one, we are reading in John chapter 5, verses 1 through 16. After this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now there is at Jerusalem by the sheep market a pool, which is called in the Hebrew tongue Bethesda, having 5 porches. In these lay a great multitude of impotent folk, of blind, halt, withered, waiting for the moving of the water. For an angel went down at a certain season into the pool and troubled the water. Whosoever then, first after the troubling of the water, stepped in, was made whole of whatsoever disease he had. And a certain man was there, which had an infirmity 38 years. When Jesus saw him lie, and knew that he had been now a long time in that case, he saith unto him, Wilt thou be made whole? The impotent man answered him, Sir, I have no man, when the water is troubled, to put me into the pool. For while I am coming, another steppeth down before me. Jesus saith unto him, Rise, take up thy bed, and walk. And immediately the man was made whole, and took up his bed, and walked. And on the same day was the Sabbath. It says here in the footnotes about this feast, it says the Koine Greek manuscripts of the Gospels read the feast implicitly the Passover. Some earlier manuscripts do not make this identification. I tend to think this was not the Passover. The Passover is the most famous feast, but he was just at the Passover fairly recently. I don't think it's been a full year since he left Jerusalem. I think he's going back for the next feast. So this is either, in my opinion, either the Feast of Pentecost, which is 50 days after Passover, and that is the harvest feast, or it is the Feast of Tabernacles, which was to be in the 7th month. It would be about 4 or 5 months after Pentecost. I'm not quite sure. But it would have been several months later. I think this is most likely that feast, the Feast of Tabernacles, which lasted 7 days and was added an 8th day to make it a grand feast and the end of the festival season. So that's what I think this. And he is healing on the Sabbath, which, according to the Jews, is it's a blasphemy to do that on the Sabbath. So remember that. But now we have this pool of Bethesda. And this is an interesting story. An angel troubles the waters. I mean, he stirs them up, and while they're roiling away, first person to touch him gets healed. Now, Luke does not say anything about this being wrong. He presents this very much as being the facts of the case. This is what happened. I'm not sure. But this man has been waiting here for 38 years trying to get into the pool, but he can never get into it in time. And so Christ healed him. And we're not told exactly what his infirmity is. It just says he had an infirmity for 30 years. But he's having trouble getting to the water. He's slow getting there, which means he's most likely lame in some way. Something's wrong with his legs. And then Christ commands him to arise and walk. And he stands up and walks. And so it's obviously something's wrong with his legs. I think it's more likely that he's like paralyzed from the waist down. And so he has to drag himself to the water. One other, when it says 5 porches, that would be like a deck that with stairs going down into the pool. So there's like the pool is like a pentagon shape, has 5 sides with these 5 porches going down into it. But let us continue now, verse 10. The Jews therefore said unto him that was cured, It is the Sabbath day, it is not lawful for thee to carry thy bed. He answered them, He that made me whole, the same said unto me, Take up thy bed and walk. Then asked they him what man it was which said unto thee, Take up thy bed and walk. And he that was healed wist not who it was, for Jesus had conveyed himself away, a multitude being in that place. Afterward Jesus findeth him in the temple, and said unto him, Behold, thou art made whole. Sin no more, lest a worse thing come unto thee. The man departed, and told the Jews that it was Jesus which had made him whole. And therefore did the Jews persecute Jesus, and sought to slay him, because he had done these things on the Sabbath day. So when they see the man who is healed, their objection isn't that he was healed. Their objection is that he's carrying his bed. In other words, he was at the pool, and he had a bed laid out for him. He had a cot, like carrying his mattress. And when Christ healed him, he said, pick up thy bed and go home. Take it home. If you don't need it here anymore, let's get it home. And they got mad at him because he was carrying it on the Sabbath, because according to the rules of the Pharisees, you can't carry things on the Sabbath. At least not those kind of things. I mean, you can carry the scriptures, but you can't carry tools or those kind of things. It's a violation of the Sabbath. Now, at first, he couldn't tell them who it was. It said that Jesus conveyed himself away. He healed the man, and then he knew that the crowds were going to start gathering. And so as soon as he healed the man, he got out of there. He didn't want to be in the crowds. He didn't want to be mobbed by the people again. And so he healed the man out of compassion, and then he left. But the next day, he meets Christ in the temple. And Christ tells him, your body is healed. Sin no more, lest a worse thing come on thee. In other words, your body was healed. Make sure your spirit is whole as well. Keep your spirit whole. And at that point, he identifies Christ to the Pharisees. And the conspiracy to kill Christ is back in full swing again. But let us look now at the Joseph Smith translation. Looks like it's primarily just more grammatical updates. In verse 3, for instance, King James says, In these lay a great multitude of impotent folk. Talking about the porches. But Joseph Smith simplifies it. In these porches lay a great many impotent folk. Nothing serious. Verse 5 changes which to who. Verse 6, it says in the King James, When Jesus saw him lie, and knew that he had been now a long time in that case, he saith unto him. Joseph Smith renders, And Jesus saw him lie, and knew that he had been now a long time afflicted, and he said unto him. Verse 8, we change saith to said. In verse 9, it says in the King James, And on the same day was the Sabbath. And we simplify that in the Joseph Smith translation, and it was on the Sabbath day. In verse 10, that is turned to who. In verse 11, that is again turned to who. And later on it says, the same said unto me. We just take out the same. So it's, he answered them, he that made me whole, the same said unto me. Joseph Smith renders it, he answered them, he who made me whole said unto me. Much simpler. Verse 11, the King James says, he answered them, he that made me whole, the same said unto me. But Joseph Smith simplifies this. He answered them, he who made me whole said unto me. In verse 12, King James, Then asked they him, What man is that which said unto thee? And Joseph Smith renders, Then answered they him, saying, What man is he who said unto thee? In verse 13, again, wist is turned to knew, and that to the. And then in verse 15, we turn which to who. So, a lot of minor grammatical updates. We leave that here. We are actually going to finish this chapter out in the next video, so I will see you there.